Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Material logic. In the very first lesson of this course, we learned that logic is the rules of correct reasoning. A couple of lessons down, we learned that another way to look at these rules of correct reasoning is to look at them as criteria for correct inference, rules that we can use in order to see whether an inference is correct or incorrect. Inference, we learned also early in this course, is of two kinds: conceptual inference and propositional inference. We focused in the first half of this course, we focused on conceptual inference, and in the second half of this course, we began our study of propositional inference, which is what we've been studying for the last couple of lessons. So if we confine ourselves to propositional inference, then the criteria, the rules of correct reasoning that are related to propositional inference can be thought of as being of two kinds. The first kind is related to the first kind of criteria are related to the form of the argument, and the second kind of criteria are related to the matter of the argument. What we've studied so far in the last couple of lessons has been related only to the form of the argument, the abstract form of the argument. You abstract away the specific terms of the propositions and you look at the structure, and that's what we've seen in the last couple of lessons. So the form of the argument needs to follow certain rules in order for the argument to be correct. So for example, this is an argument that commits a logical fallacy that logicians now call affirming the consequent. It's a fallacious argument. It's an incorrect argument. Why is it an incorrect argument? Because the form of the argument is incorrect. So if I argue that if you like logic, then you will take this course, and then I say you have taken this course, therefore you like logic, this conclusion does not follow from the premises, because the form of the argument is incorrect. The form of this argument consists of an antecedent sub-proposition, a consequent sub-proposition. Both of these are in the first main premise of the argument. In the second premise, we affirm the consequent. We affirm the second half of the initial conditional proposition, and from this, we are trying to infer the antecedent. Now, we saw that the valid forms of conditional inference are two. If you have a proposition, a conjunctive conditional proposition, as we do in this argument, there's two forms of valid inference. The first is called modus ponens. If A, then B. A, therefore B. This is a correct, valid form of logical inference. The second is called modus tollens. If A, then B, not B. We deny the consequent, therefore not A. And the conclusion is a denial of the antecedent. So the main premise is a conjunctive conditional proposition. The next premise either affirms the antecedent or denies the consequent. In our argument here, notice that we are doing neither of the two. We are instead affirming the consequent, and affirming the consequent does not formally entail any conclusion. This is why the argument form is incorrect. If you like logic, then you will take this course. You've taken this course. It doesn't follow from this that you like logic. Maybe you've taken this course and you dislike it and you dislike logic. It doesn't follow from this argument that you like logic. So how do we correct the form? We can either switch the antecedent and the consequent, or we can switch the sub-proposition of the conclusion for the sub-proposition of the second premise of the argument. Let's try and make each one of these corrections. So if we start with the latter and we switch, instead of affirming the consequent, we affirm the antecedent, and then this will give us the conclusion of the consequent. So if I say, if you like logic, you will take this course. You like logic, therefore you are taking this course. This is a correct argument form. This is a modus ponens argument. this is a correct argument. If you accept the premises, you must accept the conclusion. We could also switch the antecedent and the consequent. So if we switch them, then this will show by we've basically relabeled. We have to relabel the second premise and the conclusion, and we're left with this argument: if you take this course, you will like logic. You have taken this course, therefore you like logic. This is now a modus ponens argument. You're affirming the antecedent. It's a correct argument form. The conclusion does follow. If you accept the premises, you must accept the conclusion. So this is an example of the form of the argument, rules related to the form of the argument, and that's what we've studied so far. Modern logic is purely formal. In traditional logic, such as Islamic logic, logicians don't just study the form of an argument, but they also study the matter of the argument, the specific terms and propositions that constitute the argument. Just as we need rules for rules about the form of the argument, we need rules about the matter of the argument to ensure that the conclusion is in fact correct. So if we take, for example, this argument, which is commonly made by atheists in our times, materialists, they argue that if something exists, then it must be physical, but God is not physical, therefore God does not exist. This argument is correct if you look at the form of the argument. The argument form is a modus tollens form. We deny the consequent, and it follows from that the antecedent is false, a denial of the antecedent. Now, even though the form of the argument is correct, the conclusion is in fact false. A modern logician will say this is a valid argument. A modern logician will say that the role of logic is just to study whether an argument is valid, that modern logic cannot in fact tell you whether the conclusion of an argument is true. All that modern logic can tell you is that if you accept the premises of an argument of this form, you must accept the conclusion. The Muslim logicians, they did not confine themselves to formal logic. They also had rules for the specific sub-propositions of arguments, the terms of arguments, and using these rules, they sought to create a criterion for correct inference related to the actual subject matter of the argument. And so in this argument, the reason why the conclusion is false is because the first premise is false. It's not a condition for something to exist that it be physical. This condition is an extrapolation of our sense experience. Just because we experience many things that exist, and all of those things are physical, they occupy space, you can touch them, you can smell them. There's a generalization that's made. It's a false generalization that everything that exists must be physical. In fact, as we will see in the follow-up course to this course, that the things that we experience in the world actually are evidence for the existence of another being that is not physical. The first premise of this argument is completely false. It's not true that if something exists, it must be physical. This argument violates a rule of correct inference that is related to the matter of the argument, the substance of the argument. The study of those rules that are related to the actual matter of the argument and the actual substance of the argument, those criteria for correct inference that are related to the matter of the argument, that is called material logic. So what is material logic? Let's take two arguments. All A is B, all B is C, therefore all A is C. This is a categorical syllogism. And the second argument is a conditional syllogism. In formal logic, which we've studied in the past couple of lessons, we look at the form of the premises, and we see that given this form, the conclusion is the conclusion is formally entailed by these premises, meaning that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. That's what we study in formal logic. Material logic asks the question, how do I know that the premises are true? How do I know that? And the answer to this question is based on this idea of inferential and non-inferential knowledge, which we discussed early in this course. So the Muslim logicians, they said that we have in our minds knowledge of propositions that we know without inference, without having inferred them. Without inference, we know that, for example, that the whole is greater than the part. Without inference, we know that when I look at the sun, I know that the sun is shining. I know the fact that I observe the shining sun, this leads me to knowledge of a non-inferential proposition that the sun is shining. And there are many other non-inferential propositions as well. So I have in my mind knowledge of propositions that I have acquired without any inference. I then take two of these propositions, non-inferential propositions, and I apply the inferential process to them, and I come to knowledge of an inferential proposition. Then I can infer from that inferential proposition, one of these inferential propositions, and another non-inferential proposition, another inferential proposition, and it goes on until I acquire knowledge of many different inferential propositions. The problem of material logic is related to the non-inferential propositions. The problem of material logic, namely the problem, how do I know that the premises of an argument are true, are actual true, the actual premises are true? The answer to this problem is that the premises must either be non-inferential or they must eventually resolve through a chain of inferences to non-inferential propositions. From this, the central problem and question of material logic becomes, what are the non-inferential propositions to which all inference must resolve? That's the problem of material logic, and that's what we'll study in the next lesson. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وهو حسبنا ونعم الوكيل.